to recognize the long history of First Nations and Métis people and show respect today to the Mississaugas of New Credit. A little more than a year ago, I stood in this very spot as we announced an inquiry into systemic racism and racial profiling in policing by the Toronto Police Service. Since that time, we have made significant progress in our inquiry. And just as we promised a year ago, today we are reporting publicly on our progress to date. We have chosen a special day for this interim release, as December 10th is the 70th anniversary of the day that the United Nations General Assembly adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So it's an excellent day for thinking about the progress made in Ontario, as well as the challenges we still face 7 decades later. I now invite Renu Mandani, Chief Commissioner of the Ontario Human Rights Commission, to provide more details on the interim report we are launching today, entitled A Collective Impact. I will then invite several speakers to offer their remarks from various community perspectives. Then I will invite all of our speakers to join us for questions from the media. Chief Commissioner.
Good morning. Thank you to the media and our community members who have joined us here to mark International Human Rights Day. As Alicia mentioned, on this day, the United Nations General Assembly adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And in 1961, the Ontario Human Rights Code was introduced in the legislature to make the rights protected in the Universal Declaration a reality. From the beginning, the Ontario Human Rights Commission has actively worked to end racial profiling. 15 years ago today, we released Paying the Price, our inquiry into the lived experience of racial profiling in Ontario. And today, we launch A Collective Impact, the Commission's interim report on its inquiry into racial profiling and racial discrimination of Black persons by the Toronto Police Service. This inquiry is different from past initiatives. We will examine racial disparities in how police services are provided in Toronto and marry this hard data with lived experience and case law. The goal of our inquiry is to build trust in law enforcement and make our communities safer. Because when diverse communities trust the police, they see themselves as allies of law enforcement rather than targets. Each person in Toronto, regardless of their race or the neighborhood they live in, should be able to go about their daily life free from discrimination and harassment. The essence of freedom is being able to fulfill our full potential and contribute to society. Racial discrimination is an affront to freedom. A collective impact includes analysis of quantitative data obtained from the Special Investigations Unit. It includes a review of SIU directors' reports, which have never before been released to the public. It highlights legal decisions that have found discrimination against Black persons by the Toronto Police. A collective impact summarizes our engagement with about 130 Black people across the city. This interim report is the latest in a body of reports, findings, and recommendations over the past 30 years that point to persistent concerns about anti-Black racism in policing in Toronto. Our interim findings are disturbing and call for immediate action. The data analyzed by Dr. Scott Wortley confirms that Black people in Toronto are far more likely to have police use force against them that results in serious injury or death. Between 2013 and 2017, a Black person was nearly 20 times more likely than a white person to be involved in a fatal shooting by the Toronto Police. Despite representing only 8.8% of Toronto's population, Black people make up approximately 30% of police use of force cases that result in serious injury or death, 60% of deadly encounters with Toronto police, and 70% of fatal police shootings. During this same period, Black men were complainants in a quarter of SIU cases alleging sexual assault by Toronto police officers. The SIU director's reports reveal instances where there was a lack of legal basis for police stopping Black civilians in the first place, inappropriate searches, and unnecessary charges and arrests. The reports also raise broader concerns about officer misconduct, transparency, and accountability. The courts and oversight bodies have found incidents where officers provided biased and untrustworthy testimony, inappropriately tried to stop the recording of events, and failed to cooperate with the SIU. The data proves that Black people are overrepresented in police use of force cases that result in serious injury and death. And this situation hasn't changed since the early 2000s. We can only truly understand the meaning and impact of this data by listening to and accepting the lived realities of Black communities. For example, in 2013, an SIU director's report found that a Black man was stopped by Tavis officers. The officers held each of the man's arms and asked him whether he had anything on him. After he replied in the negative, an officer pulled down his shorts and underpants, leaving his genitals exposed to the public. The officers then laughed at him. The SIU director found that this strip search was unnecessary. The Commission learned more by speaking directly with Black people about their experiences with the Toronto police. We heard firsthand about the resulting fear, trauma, humiliation, mistrust, and expectations of negative treatment. And we heard about the damage that one person's negative experience can have on the entire community. For example, one person told us, and I quote, "The DeFonte Miller matter affects everyone in the community because it's so egregious and it was hidden. It's a collective experience. It's a collective impact." The next phase of the Commission's inquiry will analyze lower-level use of force incidents, carding, charges and arrests, and conditions and forms of release. 30 years of reports and recommendations tell us that data collection is the foundation to combat racial discrimination in law enforcement. That's why data is currently collected in the United States and the United Kingdom. Yet, the Commission's work is necessary because the Toronto Police Service does not consistently collect race-based data, and the board has never required them to do so. The Commission will also examine police culture, training, policies, procedures, and accountability mechanisms. We will hear from police leaders, frontline officers, associations, and organizations. And we will continue to learn from Black communities about their firsthand experiences. All of this work will lead to a final inquiry report with findings, recommendations, and next steps. The Commission recognizes that policing is vital to public safety and that it is a challenging and sometimes traumatic profession. We also know that the Toronto Police have a stated commitment to building trust with diverse communities to make us all safer. But trust cannot be built without first addressing persistent concerns about racial profiling and racial discrimination. The Ontario Human Rights Commission's findings in a collective impact are disturbing, and they demand an explanation. At this interim stage, we are calling on the Toronto Police to acknowledge the Commission's very serious human rights concerns. we're calling on the board to mandate the collection and public release of race-based data. We're calling on the City of Toronto to implement the Toronto Action Plan to confront anti-Black racism. And we're calling on the Government of Ontario to continue its ongoing efforts to strengthen police oversight. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Commissioner. The OHRC retained Dr. Scott Wortley to analyze the Special Investigations Unit data involving the Toronto Police Service. He is an associate professor at the University of Toronto's Centre for Criminology and Sociological Studies. He has